Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history.
I have stopped transcription. And I have started my Audacity. And it looks like my volumes are okay.
I am recording as well. My volumes look solid too.
Sync.
From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on this trip through comic book history. Welcome back to another episode of Comics Over Time. It's 2004, part 2, the year in Daredevil. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, how's it going?
It's going well. So I'm excited to get back to talking about Daredevil.
Yes, and we have a big anniversary this year. 2004 ends up being the 40th anniversary of Daredevil, and I'm going to say that they did a little job of celebrating that this year. Let's find out what's going on with the year for Daredevil. The year in Daredevil.
All right, Dwayne. So it is 2004. Daredevil is celebrating his 40th year of making comics. If you remember, 1964 is when the first Daredevil issue came out. We are now in 2004, and there's been a whole raft of comics. One complete 380 issue run, and now we're in the midst of another run. He also had a bunch of other appearances this year, though. So tell us a little bit about what Daredevil was up to, which books he was in, and then also who was making Daredevil comics this year.
Yeah, it is a big year. I was very curious when I was starting to go through the comics this year. I hadn't actually really thought about the fact that this was going to be his big anniversary year until late in the year when they did a big issue to celebrate. But the main Daredevil run this year from Daredevil Volume 2, the books that we saw this year were issues 54 to 66. He also had Daredevil Father, issue 1, the first book of that series started. And there was a Daredevil 2099 book, the first issue of that run as well. All came out in 2004. Beyond that, in other titles, Daredevil appeared in Punisher, issues 35 through 37. He was in Exiles, issues 39 and 43. Spider-Man Unlimited #1, Elektra #35. Something called the Marvel 602, issue #8. He was in Secret War, books 2 and 3. And the Powerless books, all 5 issues, 1 through 5, and then Ultimate Elektra 1 through 3. All of those books coming out in 2004. As far as the main Daredevil run this year, the writer on that started the year was David Mack, who picked up and continued his story that he started the end of 2003. And then we had the return of Brian Michael Bendis to finish out the year. As far as the art this year, David Mack did the pencils and inks for the 2 issues that he wrote. We had Alex Maleev doing the issues 56 through 64. He also was in 65 and 66, but in issue 65, that's the big 40th anniversary issue. And it was a huge group of artists that actually contributed to that. It was Maleev, Michael Golden, Greg Horn, P. Craig Russell, Phil Hester, Chris Bachalo, Jay Lee, David Finch, and Frank Quietly all had a artist credit on that book as well. So and they actually called them out by name in the on the title page, which I thought was really cool too, and really got me excited to read the issue actually, because I'm like, how are they going to use this many artists in one book?
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy one, but I think it was cool. And
Yes.
when you look at who the different artists were and the like, there were some wildly different styles going on.
Yes. Yes, there
So
was.
it was not like they were trying to disguise this. It was very much out there that they're gonna, do this book and kind of let everybody have a hand in it and the like. So that's gonna be a fun one. That
Yeah.
is gonna be the book we're talking about, correct?
Yes, that is the spotlight
So
book for this week. So we
we'll
let's
hold
not
off
waste
here.
a ton of time
Yep.
talking about it now. Let's talk about everything that happened in the main Daredevil run this year. And
Yeah, so and before we get going though on talking about the spotlight and the other ones and the main run, this was a good year for Daredevil outside of his own. So the books we're not going to talk about. Um and these are inconsistent at a certain level, but the Ultimate Elektra number 1 through 3, that's right on the heels of that Ultimate Daredevil and Elektra from last year. I actually like
okay,
this one a little better than the previous one, but
okay,
sales I think went down. This continues to be like young Elektra and Daredevil, and this is the one where they're still like at law school and the like. We get young Ultimate Bullseye in it and everything. This is only the first 3 issues here. I think it's a 5 issue series, so it'll finish up next year. But it's actually pretty entertaining stuff. And then Daredevil Father is a is one that people have wildly different opinions on, but it is written and drawn by Joe Quesada. And I think it is
oh,
worth noting because if you're a big fan of like the Quesada artwork from the Kevin Smith days and the like, this is another chance to see Joe Quesada draw Daredevil.
okay,
And to be quite frank, it's worth it the price of admission just for that. So
sure,
those are books we're not going to go into a bunch, but I do think that they're worth talking about, as well as Daredevil 2099, where you start seeing sort of the interpretation of Daredevil in that future 2099 universe as well. So so
gotcha.
it was an interesting year for Daredevil all over the place. And now we're
Yeah,
going to ignore all of that because none of it actually associates to the Daredevil we're doing right now. Actually, I think
right.
that's not true. Daredevil Father was actually in the main universe. But
Okay,
uh, proceed, my man.
yeah.
Proceed.
All right. So when we're talking about Daredevil 2004, the year actually begins late in 2003, as we noted a couple weeks ago with our 2003 discussion, with the return of David Mack to writing and art, and Maya Lopez in the book itself. She returned to New York and is looking to reconnect with Daredevil. And after he shares he's now with someone else, she instead visits with a chief her father knew and goes on a vision quest. There, with the help of a man shaped in the form of Wolverine, helps her understand a story her father used to tell her and helps her realize who she is. She goes back to Daredevil and bids him goodbye with a kiss. Man, David Mack art is so cool. And like this book basically has this story doesn't have Daredevil really in it at all. He bookends like the first book and the last book and is there for like a page in both cases. And this is a Maya Lopez story. This is an Echo story, and yet I was still just transfixed because of the artwork and then the just the really interesting story to go along with it.
Mac, I've heard talk about this, and uh, I believe both from what I've read and just from what kind of I've seen in other stories, I think this was actually initially conceived of as an Echo miniseries.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And the Echo miniseries was then turned into a set of stories in the main Daredevil line, because Alex Maleev, with that gorgeous art that he's doing in the main run, needed more time. And so they just took it and dropped it directly in after one of the Bendis Maleev stories. Let him take over for 5 issues, which nobody's going to complain about these being the fill-in issues, right? And
Right.
then they start back up again with the Bendis Maleev issues after this.
I will say though, the only drawback of this is we just had this like ridiculous, over the top Daredevil versus Kingpin story where basically Matt Murdock unveils himself as being Daredevil to Josie's bar, beats the snot out of Kingpin, and basically proclaims himself the Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen.
Yes.
And then we have to wait through this interesting and cool looking story to find out what's going on with that. So I love this story from David Mack. I love his art, but I was chomping at the bit to find out what was going on with Daredevil, and this didn't really help me there.
No, it is interesting though, because when we do get back into the main Daredevil story, it has skipped forward a little bit. And we don't see Daredevil kind of becoming the Kingpin of New York. He just has been that now for a while.
Yes.
So in some ways it actually does make sense in the story, even that we're off following what's going on with Echo and whatever, and then when we come back, oh hey, look who's been the Kingpin of New York for 6 months or whatever, so it, nonetheless, you're completely right. It is weird because there's a massive sort of cliffhanger and a change in the status quo, and then we just ignore it for a while.
A huge status quo change, and then we had to wait almost half a year until we get more of that particular story.
Correct.
But as far as our narrative goes, from here, Brian Michael Bendis, Alex Maleev return with a story called The King of Hell's Kitchen, in which we learn it's been a year since that confrontation between Kingpin and Daredevil, and according to Ben Urich, Daredevil has been very busy cleaning up the kitchen while also taking some flack about his methods from some other superheroes.
Correct.
His latest dealings have him going up against the Yakuza, and after a large battle, Daredevil's gone missing. We have Mila Donovan reaching out to Ben Urich to find him, and then during their discussion, because all of this is from Ben Urich's point of view.
Yep.
We learn that Murdock and Mila Donovan have been married and got married 4 months ago.
Yep.
Absolutely crazy. This is so just over the top. Just, I could not believe this. And Mila Donovan, just brand new character, just is here, and she's looking for him, and it then makes sense why she's reaching out to Ben Urich and all this sort of thing, and things just start to sort of unravel because you're just like, Ben Urich's talking to somebody and you don't know who it is, and then you find out who it is, and then you're like, okay, well, I don't know who this is, and then suddenly we learn this person is really important to Matt Murdock.
She's very new in terms of she's the current girlfriend who's only been around for a while, but this is the person who we've been seeing under threat in all of the previous issues and the like, and who's sort of started dating Matt back before he decided to go crazy and the like. So sometime in the last whatever time, she has gone from being the current girlfriend who somehow didn't get killed by Bullseye to being now actually Matt Murdock's wife.
Yes.
I don't think any of us were having that on our bingo card. So
no. But
it's been a few weeks, so just to make sure this is Mila is still the girl he was dating before.
Completely new, I guess. Yes. Yeah. No, sorry about that. All right, so the story goes on. Ben Urich actually finds Matt Murdock and reunites the married couple, but not before suggesting that the events of the last year are all his way of coping with the death of Karen Page. With a little help from some of his superpowered friends, Daredevil puts a stop to the Yakuza plot to take over Hell's Kitchen. Mila confronts Matt about his problems getting over the death of Karen Page, and then leaves. She actually sort of calls off the whole marriage thing. Is like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to be the rebound girl. I think is sort of the feeling on this.
I think that's more the case. Is she must have agreed that somehow that's what's going on, because it didn't seem she was all that worried about being in danger. She's like, we can deal with the danger, but there's this idea that somehow the her husband is actually just sort of slowly going insane, and that is not something that necessarily makes a healthy start to a marriage. And so away she goes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a wild sort of return to what is going on. Next, we get a storyline featuring another one of Matt's love interests, the Black Widow, in a story called The Widow. Black Widow gets called in by S.H.I.E.L.D. and realizes it's a trap. Instead, goes to visit Matt Murdock in New York, hoping she can hide in plain sight. The pair take down Jigsaw, and upon making bail, he goes back to Murdock asking permission to run crime through Hell's Kitchen since he's the new kingpin. Yeah. To which Matt Murdock, not very amused by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take some balls.
I'd say that he'd have to have, Matt Murdock level of confidence to try and pull that sort of thing off.
Yeah. Yep. That is nuts.
As that story continues, it turns out that hiding in plain sight didn't work, as the two get shot at by a hired assassin while having lunch. The pair go after the assassin, and after that, Natasha finally shares the reason for her visit. Though the conversation is cut short, as Jigsaw and his men have entered Murdock's home, and Matt can't find them as Daredevil and reveal that he's lying about the fact that he's not Daredevil, because that's the other thing, is everybody thinks he's Daredevil because of the big report in the newspaper, but then he came out and flatly denied that he is not Daredevil and is trying to put out that fire that he is not. In the end of the story, we learn that there's a Bulgarian minister and Natasha's ex-husband were behind this whole ordeal, and Matt begrudgingly gives Mila the annulment to their marriage that she was seeking upon leaving after the story picked back up. In November, we get that huge 40th anniversary special edition. The story actually backtracks over that 1 year time period that Matt Murdock was outed as Daredevil that Ben Urich told us about during the King of Hell's Kitchen story earlier in the year. To do this, Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev call in a host of other artists to help them tell the story. And this seems like the perfect book to be this week's spotlight, because it actually, it's one book, but it is a handful of like short stories in one book, and they're all told with different artists. So it ends up being actually just a fantastic book. There is one more book that happens this year, but it starts a new storyline, so we're going to actually save that for our 2005 discussion. So for all intents and purposes, this is where we're at. We've got that year skip ahead from the big confrontation. Matt Murdock's been cleaning house in Hell's Kitchen, and we, at the end of the year, get to find out what that year actually kind of looked like through a bit of basically flashbacks, I guess, short flashback stories.
Nope.
But yeah, this was a great year. I was anxiously awaiting the follow-up to what the big Kingpin Daredevil confrontation was, and I didn't have the Yakuza coming back in, but sure, okay. I guess since you've taken care of the Kingpin, you got to bring somebody in to kind of be an adversary to Daredevil, and that's as good as as good a foe as any. And then we get the return of Black Widow as well, with
Mhm.
his marriage is sort of estranged.
Yep. And
What did you what
go
did you
ahead.
think of the year?
So I think this fantastic year of Daredevil. It's interesting in so many ways. I love Maleev's art. I love everything about these stories from from the fact that you essentially start out the year finishing off kind of the Echo storyline. That is fascinating because it adds extra layers not only to Echo, kind of rounding her out as a character, but you
Yeah,
learn a lot more about Fisk. You learn a lot more about sort of that whole world. Mack's art and story is just it's so far above what a lot of other people are doing at this time, just in terms of the depth of the storytelling, how completely insane and yet perfect the art is. That he blends all these different styles: watercolor, traditional drawing, like little Japanese chibi drawings, and sometimes it's like he's doing collages on there and everything. So you start out with that, and then you get into a lot of these other storylines that are sort of showing what happens after Matt takes over. And he's got not only that, I like that it deals with all of the aspects. So what happens if a superhero says, my territory is off limits to crime? And it turns out two things happen. All of the rats go and infest the neighborhoods around them, meaning
yeah,
that now, all the rest of them, Doctor Strange is like, well, now Greenwich Village is full of all of these people because,
yes,
yeah, and essentially Daredevil's like, we'll take over and clean it up. And at some point, I think it's Cage is just like, well, then they all go to Pittsburgh, and then we got to go to Pittsburgh to find him and fight him. How do you do this where there's not you can't keep every place clean? And
there,
by hollowing out Hell's Kitchen, what he's also done is not only did he make all the rats leave the ship, but now everybody's looking at it and going, there is no crime infrastructure here anymore. If we just take out Daredevil, we can come in and become. That's why the
clean
Accusers coming
house.
in.
Yeah, yeah, we
They
can.
look at it as essentially free territory, right?
Right.
And so I like the fact that Bendis has sort of thought through some of that. Um, and the way that the story progresses and everything just really makes sense. I'm not so sure about the whole he got married thing. That did seem a little weird that how just how disturbed Matt Murdock, the seemingly completely like, allergic to any sort of commitment character would be, that he would decide to get married. That is a significant um, indicator of some mental distress for him, it seems. But so that was weird. I will also say that I loved the covers this year.
Yeah,
Alex Maleev's, especially his Black Widow covers. Black Widow has never looked better than she does on the covers of like issues number 61 and 63 and 64. And just in general, he's got sort of this almost like liquid sort of effect on her uniform where she just looks more Black Widowy than she does anywhere else in the comics during this time. Uh,
sure.
Bill Sienkiewicz does sort of a similar thing, but Maleev, I think, really is probably the best Black Widow artist, at least of this era. He's just fantastic. And the stories, I love the Widow comes back, and the relationship between those two is so weird and
Yeah,
complex and interesting.
yeah,
That really also, is a big part of it that makes me happy. So everything about these books is
yeah.
just fantastic.
I God, I mean, I've been a fan of Brian Michael Bendis to this point, and he just continues to keep putting just these awesome stories with Daredevil on the pages, and the artist that he's working with, and out like you said, Alex Maleev this year just did a fantastic job, and I think I would say that I think I would like the stories no matter who was drawing them, if I'm being perfectly honest, just because the stories themselves are really interesting. But I mean, they can't help but be enhanced when you have some really, really talented artists working with you as well.
Yeah, we say that, but I also will note that there is an awful lot of navel gazing in these books, and that
Sure, 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 sure.
it would be very easy for a less talented artist to make it apparent that there's no action going on for like 6 issues. But Maleev makes every panel so interesting and the characters so interesting and all of his choices in terms of what he does with the camera and that cinematic use of everything. You don't notice nothing's happening because you're so taken in by the images. So I do think that yes, the story's fantastic, but he does need a good artist to pull this stuff off, or people will get bored.
They will get, yeah, I suppose you're right. I don't know. I'm all about character driven stories. And so, like, some of these sort of existential things that Daredevil's trying to deal with, or what Matt Murdock's trying to deal with, and all this conflict, and that he's sort of slowly succumbing to, I guess, whether it's his own fault or not, I think just ends up being really interesting. And yeah, outside of the normal thing I would expect to see when I open up a superhero book, I guess.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, should we dive in and talk about this issue 65? Because I think this, I think, sort of encapsulates, from a story standpoint, a lot of really interesting things.
Sure. But I do want to note that just about any one of these issues could have been chosen as a spotlight issue, and we'd have been happy with it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think any of these stories were worth spotlighting, but the fact that we had like an anniversary issue, I think was,
you've made the right choice. It's just there was no bad choice. So
right.
Bring it on. Let's talk about this book.
This week's Spotlight story.
All right, Dwayne. So we've already kind of shown why this is happening, but you've chosen Daredevil number 65 from November of 2004, story called The Universe, as our spotlight this year.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about this story.
Yeah. So last year we celebrated issue 50 of the volume 2 run. And now this week we get to celebrate 40 years of Matt Murdock and the Man Without Fear with a double issue and no less than 12 credited artists on this issue. This issue is actually a series of short stories, roughly 6 pages in length each, of various events that have happened during that missing year between the Kingpin fight and the King of Hell's Kitchen story arc that we saw at the beginning of the year. The issue itself starts 14 months ago, and we see Nick Fury looking at the Daily Globe headlines stating Matt Murdock is Daredevil. From there, we see him pay a visit to Matt Murdock and asks how he plans to deal with his secret being out. Fury says Murdock is cooked and offers him a job as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. so that he can reinvent himself. Murdock defiantly says, I'm not leaving my life, I'm staying here. Fury says the offer stands and he should take it before he gets himself killed, and then leaves. It's not like this is important. It's not like we needed to see this, but I just love the fact that this is like the first story we get, because I think I'm imagining what happens when people see the headline of Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and not just like the average people and not necessarily the villains, but what do other people think? And Fury seems like the guy that would be opportunistic enough to be like, hey, you know what? I think he'd be a really good S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. I should probably see if I can recruit him. Dan, what did you think of this short story?
First off, I loved it because of the fact it's drawn by a guy named Michael Golden. This guy does not do comic books anymore. Like, he was very, very rarely doing anything in comics from probably the late 80s. And in fact, when I look at it, for Marvel at least, this one story, doing 5 pages for Daredevil in 2004, was the first time he'd done anything for them other than like a pinup story since 1997. And that 1997 story, which was a Doctor Strange story, was the first thing he'd done since like 1991. So he absolutely, and this is the last thing he's done. So this is a precious artifact in terms
Yeah.
of. I loved Golden back in the day. He did a bunch of stuff, including the first 12 issues of Micronauts, which I was a big fan of. But at a certain point, he got tired of sort of the weird cult of personality stuff going on with comics, and he evidently makes really good money doing advertising work. And so he has not really done anything in comics for decades. So I just love seeing Michael Golden's artwork. It is so clean and so just classic. And you can see because a number of other people have been inspired by him. His artwork was something that a lot of 90s artists especially really enjoyed. So it's cool just from that. But other than that, yeah, I think it's interesting how again you start seeing how the things that have been happening with him sort of start to influence the rest of the world. How would Nick Fury react if suddenly there's sort of an agent that needs to come in out of the cold or something like this, which is
Right.
essentially what's happening. So yeah, I like it. I think this was a cool start because it shows first off that he had kind of that easy out if he wanted to take it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just not what he was going to do. So he could give up the life, but that's not him. And
No.
so
We've
then we
talked
move on.
we've talked about the fact that he seems to want to have his cake and eat it too, and this is just
Yep.
more proof of that. He's had outs that he could have taken, but he keeps choosing kind of the hard way to do things, and
Mm-hmm.
so some of this is on him at the end of the day.
Yep.
So the next story we get is what looks to be a full page painted panel story narrated by Peter Parker, learning about Matt Murdock's secret getting out. First, he's at the newsstand seeing the story on the newspaper. Next, he's at the Daily Bugle during his and Urich's confrontation about Daredevil's identity with J. Jonah Jameson, which we had seen when the story initially played out. Then we see him taking on Mr. Hyde with Daredevil, then talking to Daredevil about it afterwards, or trying to, I guess. But Matt tells him to just stay away. And in the final page, we see Parker along with Mary Jane on the couch watching television with Peter Parker thinking, looks like I've already lost a good friend. Good luck, Matt.
Yeah.
Entirely different look and feel. These are like I said, they look like painted, and they were very much full page painted panels, and different narrator of the story. I love this. This was a cool story as well.
100%. These are in actual fact painted. This is Greg Horn, who is a guy who he actually did the Elektra series from the early 2000s. So he'd been working in the Daredevil world, and he's mostly famous actually for doing sort of like pin-up covers of female characters for Marvel. So really, really good digital painter. Very much sort of does almost like cheesecake sort of painting stuff for a lot of the covers. But as you can see from all of these, just in general, he is a fantastic digital painter artist because he's got things of Spider-Man kind of um sitting outside of Murdock's building and the like. Really, a lot of these, in fact, if you look at them, are digital renditions of panels that were in some of the books in previous years.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, but so really, really cool stuff. And yeah, it just kind of gives you that ability to see Spider-Man's sort of take on some of this sort of stuff, you know?
Yeah,
And
because I mean, he's worried about his secret getting out too, and
yep,
he sees somebody he knows having the thing happen to him that he could conceivably have happened to him at some point,
yep, and
and he
that's that last painting, is
yeah
basically him sitting there with MJ cuddled in on the couch. He's got a picture of Aunt May on the wall. He's got a picture of him and Mary Jane's wedding. And he kind of can just sit, he's got all of this, but potentially he's sitting there with almost this faraway stare, kind of like, man, it could all be taken away. I could
yeah
lose everything just like he did.
yep. So for the next story, we see Matt Murdock in Central Park meeting up with Captain America Steve Rogers about 13 months ago. Matt nearly leaves after seeing Rogers in his costume, but ultimately stays when Rogers tells him no one will see them talk. Rogers asks Matt why he didn't come to the Avengers before his secret got out. We could have put you under our umbrella. You would have been untouchable, says Steve. You should have come to us. Matt Murdock answers back he didn't want to be a hypocrite, only coming to them when he needed something, having turned them down before. I would have ruined you along with me, says Murdock. Rogers reassures him that everything happens for a reason and that this just may be for the best before the two of them shake hands and then go their separate ways. It's a simple story, and yet it provides sort of this like glimpse again, the another person trying to reach out to help Matt Murdock and make things a little bit easier, and he doesn't do it. He's taking this lone road and going to see it through to its bitter end, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah. At least he's a little bit more civil with Captain America than he is with most of them. So he
Yeah,
seems to have at least a little respect for Cap. Um, the other thing that's amazing here, by the way, P. Craig Russell is the guy on art. Again, not somebody who does superhero comics anymore. This guy's like, winning awards with Neil Gaiman, doing Sandman stories that win fantasy art awards. And he's doing full sort of books of his own where he's writing and adapting and drawing stuff. Very rarely does he do a Marvel or a DC comic. And yet somehow they get him and Golden, who, by the way, share in many ways kind of a similar style in some ways. But the quality of the artists, and almost in terms of the like the mythical Sasquatch quality of finding these people here in a Marvel comic, is just crazy
right.
in this. So,
Yeah,
and as you'd expect, it is it is fantastic and beautiful. It's just the two of them standing around talking, but again, Russell's art is just perfect and kind of makes the whole thing pop. So I thought that was pretty amazing as well.
yeah. Uh, Again, very differing styles going back and forth there. I really just love catching these different, just sort of snapshots. That's all these are. It's just like little moments that happened, and these are sort of before that whole year end, that the year lost
Yep.
in the cleanup, but it's that stuff that immediately happened right after the news broke that he was Daredevil, and the way things sort of started crashing down around him.
Yep.
So from there, we skip ahead to Josie's bar 12 months ago, and we see Murdock crash through the wall and throw the beaten Kingpin to the floor and tells everyone he's the new Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen. So we get a new look at that from a new artist. Then we skip ahead 2 months, and we see Daredevil confronting and beating up some arms dealers. And while he's securing things, Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, pulls out a large weapon on Murdock. Castle wants to know what Daredevil will do with these arms and thinks, despite what Murdock says, they aren't on the same side anymore. The two end up fighting, and eventually Daredevil knocks out Castle, and then he leaves the warehouse and phones FBI agent Driver, who we saw through at various points earlier in the story. That was one of the FBI agents that he was working with. So
Yep.
yeah, we're starting to dig into the whole him doing the cleanup of Hell's Kitchen and what he's doing, and so he's, you know, and other superheroes are coming after him and suggesting that, you know, hey, we don't like what you're doing here because what you're doing has consequences beyond just what's going on in Hell's Kitchen.
Yep. Yeah, and this is, you know, that constant question of just how much alike Daredevil and the Punisher are is something that kind of haunts all iterations of these characters kind of running into each other. So I think it's cool that they brought him into the anniversary issue because he's become a big part of kind of the Daredevil universe. This one done by Phil Hester and Andy Parks. I think probably they got the gig partly because Hester had previously done work on like a bunch of stuff with Kevin Smith and the like, and was maybe in kind of with that gang that was doing a lot of this stuff. But fine artist. He's somebody who does do a lot more contemporary work. So now we're getting into an artist who is not one of these sort of mythical beasts from the past, but actually just a really good current working artist who was doing stuff for Marvel and DC at the time. But excellent work.
Yeah. So the next story, we see Daredevil talking to Doctor Strange after their meeting in Central Park, where Cage and his group confronted Matt Murdock about his becoming the Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen, that we saw actually during the King of Hell's Kitchen storyline early in the year. The two are having tea in the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Doctor Strange tries to impart some proverbial wisdom to Murdock, but when that doesn't work, asks him the last time he went to church, which causes Matt to think about the death of Karen Page. Been a while. Murdock asks Strange if he's got any magic that can make things the way they were before. Strange says no, and the story ends with Murdock looking out the window saying, "Guess this is it then. This is my life." Which really, if there's one person I thought I would want to see like a conversation between, I think actually Doctor Strange would have been one of the few people that I really would have wanted to see Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, talk to. And Strange does try to help. Like he tries to help, but I mean, this is sort of the situation Matt Murdock has put himself in, and he's not taken the easy way outs that have been presented to him. And I don't know if it's now that it's sort of sinking into him that he's passed up on opportunities to make this easier, and now he's just sort of stuck, or what. But this was kind of just a real sort of somber ending to this story.
Yeah, Bachalo's got just, I mean, it's blacks and shadows everywhere. So it's a very somber sort of set of pages. Also, the page where he sort of goes back and is thinking about Karen when Strange asks him is a full page that is just, it's fantastic and it's eerie and it's sad, and it's basically him sort of cradling her as she's dying. There's a kind of this wavy, almost like brick wall thing where you're seeing Bullseye and the church and everything like that. But it is really pretty crazy. And Bachalo's Bachalo was kind of at the top of his game here in the early 2000s, and these pages are, for being a couple guys sitting around having coffee or whatever, they are action packed.
Yes. So, yeah, it is a very, very haunting picture when he thinks about church. And yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Really love this story. I think this was the one that I loved the look of the best. And yeah, Chris Bachalo is somebody I really like.
Yep.
So after a couple full-page panel artworks of Daredevil, I think these were done by David Finch, we get one final two-page story, not from the past, but today at FBI headquarters. In it, we see Agent Del Toro staring at a board showing photos of Murdock, Daredevil, and others. She's trying to figure out how to catch Murdock as Daredevil. Just then, the FBI director shows a memo he's just gotten saying that Alexander Bont was released from prison. Who is Alexander Bont? She asks. Alexander Bont was the Kingpin before the Kingpin, and Matt Murdock was his lawyer. And the book ends with a to be continued message. So I guess we got a little bit of a preview of what's to come.
Yep. Absolutely. That's quite the thing.
I've never heard of Alexander Bont, but this got me really excited, actually.
This is new history. He, as you probably note, since we've read every Daredevil comic coming up to this, Alexander Bont has not actually, at least not in a regular Daredevil comic, has never actually appeared. So this is new information because it's completely made up. And
right.
We'll see how it does. So the three pinups, by the way, were Jay Lee, David Finch, and Frank Quietly.
Okay.
So again, fantastic artists.
Yeah. It was just just a single full page panel, I think, for each of them. And
basically
it was
posters.
Yeah. Those all the time, I think, look cool. And David Finch is somebody I've liked for a very long time. And so anytime I could see a full page panel that he's done, yes, thank you. Please let me have more. I like more of that, please. But yeah, so that is your 40th anniversary double issue of Daredevil. Not maybe what you were thinking it was going to be, but I loved it all the same. I really like seeing these like short stories of and giving me more context or more information about things that I saw previously, or maybe things that I didn't see previously, things that happened that sort of makes me question exactly what is Matt Murdock thinking? Why is he continuing to try to travel down this road all by himself without any help besides Foggy Nelson? And Foggy Nelson can only do so much.
Well, and Foggy isn't in this book.
No, that's
the other weird thing is you've got a 40th anniversary issue, which Matt doesn't do any lawyering. Matt doesn't have his best friend with him. Karen, of course, is dead, but you don't have Black Widow in it, and she was actually when you talk about the 40th anniversary, Black Widow was actually one of the characters on the title for probably about 15, 20 issues.
Right.
So it is interesting that it is a 40th anniversary issue that spends all its time reminiscing about half a year that is not part of the 40 years they're celebrating.
Sure. Yeah. If you think about it, yeah.
I will never complain because the roster of artists that they created to subject us to this is fantastic enough that you just go with it and go, yeah, this is awesome. But it is a little weird because it's not sort of the kind of, victory lap that a 40th anniversary book might sometimes be thought to be. Hey, look at these 40 awesome years of Daredevil. It's very much it's amazing this guy hasn't killed himself yet type of
Sure.
book,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it was fantastic.
I definitely would recommend this book because the artists on this were amazing. Definitely should check that out. It's in Marvel Unlimited, so if you have access to Marvel Unlimited, this is a great book to take a look at.
So counterpoint though. If you're not reading this current Daredevil series, if you haven't read 50 and 55 and 60 and 65 or 64, is it really a good idea to read 65? Because none of it will make any sense. It'll be awesome art, but the story literally is 100% tied to understanding
To
what's
knowing
going
what's
on.
going on. Yeah,
Because
that
this
is
is
true.
not just a drop in and enjoy an issue of Daredevil comic book.
That is true. I yes, to your point, I think you want to see it for the art. Probably this story is going to be tough.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the story all makes sense. It's entertaining, but we are at a stage in Daredevil where single issues are not the way to go. If you want to start, if you want to enjoy issue 65, you probably have to go back. I mean, when considering the Karen trauma is a main part of what they're talking about, really, it almost what they're doing now, you have to go back to the Kevin Smith issues and read from number one if you really want to appreciate this. And I'm not saying that's a good thing for a comic book to make it that far. But at the very least, I would say you have to go back to probably the end of the David Mack Echo stuff. And you'd probably catch up if you just started with the conversation that I think that would be if you start with the conversation that Ben is having with Milla at the diner, that would that would be about the soonest to catch up, I think,
So you'd have
after
to
the
read
Echo storyline.
the whole year of Daredevil this year to really to have
Well, I mean, to
perspective.
yeah, it just seems weird because normally an anniversary issue is literally just a bunch of cool, fun stories about the character that you can enjoy. And this one is not. It's we got story to tell. Let's keep grinding away. We're going to give you fantastic artists and then just assume you're with us, you know?
Sure.
So,
All right. Dan, should we jump into the rapid fire questions?
let's bring it on. You ready for these?
Sure. It's
All right.
it's been a couple weeks, so
Who is
let's
Matt in love with this year?
well, presumably his wife, Mila Donovan, though before the end of the year, they end up getting an annulment. Though he was hesitant to do that, but ultimately, I think is uh is sort of convinced that he should do this for the betterment of her, and decides that that's what he'll do. So
And Ben Urich's thesis at a certain point is that as the trauma of losing Karen and the fact he loves Karen the way he did, that made him sort of lose his mind and get married and do all this other stuff. So there's a
yeah,
point to be made that it's Karen,
yeah, that
uh,
is true.
or who knows, because it's Daredevil. So, who is the biggest villain of the year?
So the Yakuza are pretty much the biggest threat to Hell's Kitchen this year. If you're talking about like the main story, I mean, obviously he's threatened by whatever's going on with Black Widow as well. But when we're thinking about what Daredevil is going to be worried about, it's going to be Hell's Kitchen, and so it was the Yakuza this year.
The other option probably would be sort of like Thunderbolts, where the main villain is trauma essentially.
Yeah,
And you
that
know,
that is true too. Yes.
did we see Matt practicing law this year?
No, we did. We didn't see him in the courtroom this year at all, and it's been a while.
Yeah,
He's focused on trying to tamp down the Daredevil rumors, which he's not really having any luck with. And I would think one of the ways you could do that would be, going into the courtroom and being a lawyer, but he doesn't seem to be doing much of that.
he is busy kingpinning right now.
Yeah,
You know,
he is busy kingpinning right now.
does anyone know or anyone new know Matt's identity?
No, the secret is still not a secret, so pretty much it
No.
is there. It would be somebody that it would be more difficult to find somebody who didn't know Matt Murdock's identity right now.
No. Is Daredevil still a good guy this year?
So by and large, I'm gonna say yes. He's still trying to have it all, including a wife this year somehow, and none of it is really going his way. We learned that he could have taken some easier ways out during the anniversary issue, but he chose not to do that. Um, he's still helping to protect Hell's Kitchen against
He's
the Yakuza, so still doing the
he's
hero thing a little bit.
he's taken over as like the kingpin, the gang lord of a large borough of New York. Is that really 100%? I mean, all of the other good guys are like, dude, you've gone
Yeah,
too far. So, but yes, he's trying.
he's
How about the Daredevil outfit? What are you thinking about that? Did we see it all this year?
he was not in the Daredevil costume that much this year, and but when he was, I don't remember any particular changes to it. I think it's been pretty consistent now for the last couple years.
Yeah, it might have in the fight against Punisher in the anniversary issue. I think he was in the costume, maybe, and then maybe Black Widow convinced him to use it once. I can't remember, but pretty much, yeah, he's just put it away currently. And we learn anything new about Matt's past this year?
So, kind of in that 40th anniversary, we get some snapshots of things that weren't covered in the main storyline. The talk with Fury, the talk with Captain America, so, some of those sorts of things, as well as some of the that confrontation. Some of we get an idea of what he was doing,
No,
cleaning up Hell's Kitchen and then going up against the Punisher and that sort of thing as well. So get a little bit more color and context to that missing
recent
year.
history.
Yeah.
And what is your biggest moment of the year? Uh,
So to me, I think the biggest year is when we learn Ben Urich has been talking to Mila Donovan, and she tells him that she and Matt Murdock are married. That to me was the most surprising moment of the year, and sort of felt like it was going to be very important going forward. Though it did end up leading to the annulment, like we talked about.
yep, 100% co-sign that. I think that is absolutely correct. Cool.
All right, I think that wraps up our year for Daredevil. There was a lot, and like we said, we got that preview to Alexander Bont, and I'm really excited to see what 2005 looks like. And and with that, I think we jump in and let's talk about the takeaway for this year. This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, sum it up for us. 2004. If we look back, what is the overarching thing that we should keep in mind if we're thinking about the 2004 in comics, Daredevil, films, all that sort of thing? What are you taking away from this year in comics?
No, we talked about how reading Marvel's great, but when you see Jean Grey die for the second time, Marvel's sort of told you what they need, and it's time to start looking into other things because they're going to be repeating themselves. And really, I think that what we're seeing here is, the X-Men are kind of starting over. Um, the Avengers are disbanding, and you're going to have a new Avengers start. You've got the Ultimate Universe plugging along with all sorts of new characters, including that Ultimate Spider-Man that's proven to be extremely popular. Marvel is bringing out a new Wolverine. They've got X-23 who's going to come out and give us a new character in that part of the universe. They're rebooting Guardians with Peter Quill. We are at sort of the beginning of a new Marvel phase, if that makes sense. If you were talking about the movie phases, phase one, phase two, whatever, this would be phase whatever of the Marvel universe.
Sure.
I don't know how
How
many
many
times
phases have we had? Yeah.
you'd want to consider there to be reboots. Probably two or three previous Jean Grey deaths or soft reboots they've done. with like the Avengers Reborn and some of that sort of stuff. But this is another one. This is an ending of an era of Marvel Comics and the beginning of another one. This is an era that is designed to be marketable to younger people. It's an era that's designed to be friendly to sort of commoditization by Hollywood and television and trying to find a way to make these characters more palatable to be turned into movie properties or things like that. It's an era that's going to try to sort of take that Stan Lee idea of the world outside your window and actually realize that there are black people and gay people and whatever else outside the window, which was sort of conveniently overlooked for most of the 60s and 70s. And it's just going to be a very different time in Marvel Comics. But this is really where it begins. These early years of the 2000s now, we are starting to see kind of this blossoming of a new generation of writers, a new generation of artists. I think Bendis is a big part of this. Quesada is a big part of this. But sort of they brought in and they were the vanguard of this group that's just going to sort of roll through and revamp Marvel Comics. I mean, guys like Greg Pak, and what he's going to do to the Hulk. It's a fantastically important time for Marvel. And the books that come out for the next 5 to 10 years have a level of originality and of sort of inventiveness that is astonishingly important to the fact that we had stories that actually could be turned into movies that are going to make $1 billion. Because, yeah, the Marvel stories of the 60s and 70s were great, but they needed to be updated. The characters needed to be updated. The ideas needed to be updated. The scenarios needed to be updated. And that's what's starting to happen here. The Daredevil of these books is the Daredevil that the Netflix series gets made off of, not the Daredevil of the Gene Colan books.
Right.
And not even, to be quite frank, the Daredevil of the Frank Miller books. Because I think that while the characters and some of the scenarios are very similar there, they do the born again stuff, but they do the born again stuff more in the style of the stuff from the 2000s. So
right.
And Daredevil is one of the characters that you might be able to argue at backwards on, because to be quite frank, the Miller stuff was so modern and was so important and influential that it probably was adapted more faithfully than most of the stuff from the 80s and 70s would have been. But in any case, I think the takeaway from this is that you're starting to see the modern Marvel universe take shape. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely feels like something I recognize from the standpoint of stuff that I'm reading from more current stuff that I'm reading, and it more closely matches what I've seen, on TV and in movies.
Yep. And there's a few big twists still along the way. Peter Parker probably shouldn't get too comfortable sitting on that couch with his wife, because things are going to happen that will tear fandom apart in the next few years. But nonetheless, right now it looks like they're starting to get things in order, and it's a combination of all these great new people, and then also sort of returning to some of the better ideas of the past with things like Astonishing X-Men, maybe reining in some of the excesses and bringing that back and getting that ready for another go around the idea merry-go-round as well. So pretty excited. I think you're going to find that there's some really good stuff coming up the next few years.
All right. That sounds like a good takeaway for us for this year. And with that is going to wrap it up for us this week and put a wrap on 2004. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Maybe you read these 2004 books, or specifically the Spotlight book for this week, the big 40th anniversary issue. We'd love to know what you thought. You can send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via Blue Sky. We are at Comics Overtime there. Another year in the books, Dan. We're coming up on 2005. I can't believe we've been doing this and have 40 years of Daredevil under our belt.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
pretty cool.
We've got a new Kingpin to talk about here in a couple weeks, and I'm very curious to see what else is going on in the world of comics.
I hadn't thought about that, actually, that technically it's a 40-year anniversary for us in terms of actually making it through 40 years of talking about Marvel Comics as well. So congratulations to us and to any listeners out there who've been with us through the whole journey. Appreciate your time and joining us, and looking forward to seeing what we've got left the next 20 years, I guess, of Marvel before we catch up to current.
Yeah, that doesn't seem so far away now as it did once upon a time.
It did seem a long way away when it was 60 years.
Yeah. All right. Until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.